A picture of this, they can grow up to 26 feet long and weigh more than 200 pounds.
Hard to believe, but true. We're talking about Burmese pythons, and some estimates indicate there could be tens of thousands of the snakes just slithering around the Everglades.
And that's why the state of Florida has had its first python hunting season this year.
But as it turns out, Mother Nature did a lot better than the hunters. Fox 2 News reporter Hal Sherrick has tonight's special report.
The thought of some creatures can send shivers down the spine. On top of that list for many folks are snakes. We have a tendency to fear what we don't understand. The state of Florida has a serious snake problem on its hands. Giant Burmese pythons are living and breeding in the Everglades. The state has even asked hunters to help eliminate them. What's to prevent the pythons from eventually migrating north and invading our part of the coast? We went to South Florida to hunt these snakes and get answers for ourselves in this special report, Snake Invasion. When you think of Florida, it conjures up images of Disney World, orange groves, beautiful beaches, and stunning sunsets. Florida is also home to a truly natural wonder, the Everglades. An unwanted visitor now calls the Everglades home, one that can reach 20 feet and 200 pounds. Thousands of Burmese pythons are now thought to live here.
That would sort of lock those snakes in Florida.
And this has state wildlife officials very concerned.
It's hard to tell how the native wildlife is going to respond, but we've introduced a top predator. It has an unlimited range of choices for what it can eat size-wise.
The Burmese python is native to Southeast Asia, and Americans grew a fascination for big snakes. The port of Miami became a major entry point for the reptile trade, and breeders set up shop in South Florida. Then, along came a storm.
Category 5 hurricanes are tough.
And disaster struck.
Hurricane Andrew opened the floodgates for us, turned an awful lot of snakes loose in one area. It took a while for them to catch hold, and it wasn't for several years that we realized what was going on.
To better understand the magnitude of the problem, we came to South Florida to talk to a man the state asked for help last summer. He's been hunting for those pythons ever since. In the summer of 2009, the state issued permits to Greg Graziani and a handful of other experienced professionals, which allowed them to capture and retain any Burmese python found on the state land that surrounds the national park. Many snakes were, in fact, caught. With each one, media attention grew, and so did public apprehension. In response, the Florida Wildlife Commission created an open hunting season for the pythons, which ran from January through mid-April.
I don't think it's going to do a whole lot because these individuals are not reptile people. They don't necessarily know where to look.
While they use waterways to travel, the pythons spend most of their time on land. They feed on a wide variety of prey and target small mammals and birds. Some find it conceivable that a big snake could target a small person, such as a child. The pythons are brilliantly camouflaged for ambushing their prey, and this makes them very difficult to see, unless you know what to look for. Greg, I guess for these folks that are just trying to come out and find a python, they can be pretty difficult to see from everything you've showed me right now. I mean, this is not very thick of an area, but even so, it would be easy to miss, wouldn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you just walked by a 9-foot python. And when we reach in here, we don't know where the head is either, but we've got over an 8-foot python here.
Much of the southern U.S. is temperate enough to sustain these pythons. Because of this, fear has spread that they could migrate north and become a widespread problem. So the question becomes, could we soon be facing a snake invasion along the central Gulf Coast? Experts say this is very unlikely.
Depends on how far along.
Snake hunter Greg Graziani has seen firsthand the impact that the environment can have on the snake population.
We don't have any scientific data showing that these animals are going to be able to survive outside of South Florida. As a matter of fact, after this past winter, the estimates are between 75 to 85% of what was out there died due to the cold.
Despite those assurances, some Central Florida residents remain unconvinced. Tanya Lee had a prior experience with a Burmese python.
My mother-in-law, Eleanor Lee, she used to live down south, and they bought a retirement home over here. And they came up one day from down south, and there was a 12-foot python wrapped in the engine.
I accompanied Graziani on one of his snake hunts. The trip to the epicenter of the problem took us 3 hours south of Lake Placid to the edge of the Everglades National Park. I expected a treacherous walk through swamps, but as it turns out, that's not the best way to find these snakes.
We're actually on a levee right now, which, typically would be lower. And once they've unearthed all this coral rock and mounded it up, it makes excellent crevices and hiding places for these younger pythons to get in. Yeah, that's a good-sized rattlesnake, if that's what that is.
It wasn't long before we found evidence of a snake, but this snake is much more dangerous than the pythons we're looking for and gave us reason to proceed with extra caution.
Oh yeah, that's an eastern diamondback. Look at the diamonds right on the back there. 18, 19, 20.
This 4-foot snake skin of an eastern diamondback rattlesnake had recently been shed.
That's a perfect shed.
The levee we're walking is bordered by a canal on one side and grassy wetlands on the other. It's an excellent environment for a variety of reptiles. It began to feel like we were looking for a needle in a haystack. If not for Greg's trained eye, we would have walked right by this little fellow.
The eyes are definitely alert. I've never seen an iguana out here in the Everglades. This is rare. I want you to creep right along there. Walk up on the other side of him. You might think we just can't see him. I can't outrun him, not for a short distance. Keep your eye on him and see if he starts to move, you stop. It's going to hit the water. No, that's it.
Did you see that thing move? I don't think anybody could have caught that. That was incredible. Having never seen a green iguana in this area, GPS coordinates were marked so that the find could be reported to state wildlife officials. GPS coordinates are also taken for every python that has been found. The red dots on this map mark the location of each one. The major concentration is on the eastern edge of the Everglades, right where we are. As we neared the end of the levee and the hunt, it seemed as though we would end up empty-handed. Just as we were about to call it quits, Greg makes a find that all but confirms his suspicions about the impact the cold weather had on these animals. After about 5 miles of walking this levee, we did find our python. This one obviously dead for some time, probably from the harsh winter weather they had here in South Florida. Biologists say that that's probably the fate that most of the pythons met. As the sun came to rest over our trip to South Florida, many questions had been answered. Most importantly, don't expect a snake invasion anywhere on our part of the coast. And if the people who live closest to the problem aren't worried,
no, sir, not at all. No, it'll never happen.
Then we shouldn't be worried either. Of the dozens of Burmese pythons that have been caught in the wild, only a few were reported to be north of Alligator Alley, and all of those were thought to be released pet snakes. The state of Florida had no reports of a single Burmese python being taken by hunters during the special season this year.
Since no pythons were killed or captured, this past season may be the last season. And one more footnote. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is considering a ban on the importation of Burmese pythons into the U.S., along with 8 other giant constrictor snakes.